And she's also... May I ask you a question? Because you said there is no message, it's not propaganda, it's a piece of, I think you said musical,
art,
video
yes.
art. Do you think art has a message?
Well, I don't think that art should have a message that it wears on its sleeve, because then it wouldn't be art, then it should be called something else, you know, a political tract, for example. But I think that certainly I believe in art or a vision of art that is linked to life. And if it's linked to life and it's linked to the person who is raised in a particular way and has her own ideas about, you know, things going on around her and has experienced life in a particular way, has something to say, it will come out in that artistic vision. So to that degree, I think all art is perhaps political if we think of politics in a much broader way than as a narrow kind of propaganda. And so, you know, to answer your earlier question about stepping out of the bound, I mean, I've tried in this video to step out of the Bollywood tradition, because I think when it opens, there's this woman who is singing, you know, Bollywood song that would be familiar to those audiences, and so they might be lulled into thinking it's just going to be this video about a woman singing to a beloved, or, you know, because really the lyrics of the song sort of play on that. But what ends up happening through the course of the video is that she's challenging, you know, the first setting is also military cantonment. And she's followed by, she's looking over her shoulder, and there is a man who is following her, who then picks up, you know, her words, which we find out later that she's also a writer. And so she's running through the duration of this video, and in the black and white footage, particularly those moments. And she ends up at one shot in front of the Badshahi Mosque, and at that point, she's, you know, one half of her is singing, and she's also talking on the cell phone, and at that time she's not garbed, you know, in a hijab or covered up as we, you know, so there is that element of challenge, that who can say or who decides, you know, what is appropriate or inappropriate dress codes for women, and why should it be that there is this tremendous separation between what we call the sacred and the profane? Maybe there isn't. Maybe we need to look at the world differently. And then by the end, of course, she is also, there is a, you know, there is a little bit thrown in the, you know, the character when she's singing at this cafe. She's reading a new contemporary newspaper which says, you know, lawyers want to try Musharraf for treason. So there are these little political things that are thrown in there in this kind of very pastiche, which is a very postmodernist technique, to suggest that the video is multi-layered and needs to be read at a number of different levels. And then by the end, you know, the man who has been following her, we can see him like looking for things, looking for some way to perhaps get to the woman and to possess her through her words, through her music. But eventually he's dead on the floor and she leaves. I'm sorry?
Does it have autobiographical connections?
Well, you know, gosh, that's an interesting question. I think all art is autobiographical to some degree, but I think it's meant to invoke this larger context of patriarchy and military-industrial complex. I think these things are, you know, very interlinked, and a system in which sort of women are generally chaste.
But isn't there a double metaphor here that military-industrial complex in some ways has done to the civil society what patriarchy has done to women?
Yeah. I mean, that's a wonderful, I'm not going to say yes or no, I think that's your interpretation, but I think that the video lends itself, as I said, to being read precisely in that sort of multi-layered or multi-leveled way, absolutely. And the woman, of course, escapes. I had a discussion with the team that was helping me, and at one point, somebody suggested, they thought that the woman should die at the end, and I said, absolutely not. And that is the twist on the film noir tradition also, you know, or rather it sort of takes film noir and traditions and sort of, you know, it's the woman who is being chased, but it is the woman in the end who escapes, not the man. So we played with a number of different, you know, Eastern and Western
But again, I'm intrigued.
ideas.
Why do you think she escapes when the man is dead? It should be she's triumphant. Why is she still escaping even when the man is dead?
Well, because I don't think that
that condition has changed?
That condition has changed,
right.
Precisely. And I also think that triumphalism suggests a kind of one party winning and at the cost of the other. And I don't think that that's the kind of world that we want. We want a world in which precisely the woman doesn't need to keep escaping and the man doesn't need to be killed, or the male element doesn't need to be killed. We have to find some balance between these feminine and masculine elements. I think in the video that balance doesn't actually take place, but I think it's
that's
meant to
always
suggest.
Part of a larger work, yes. You know, when Faiz Ahmad Faiza, a great poet, he was in Moscow, he had an occasion to meet with Sartre, the French philosopher, and Sartre, according to Faiz Sahab, told him that the great themes of our times belong to the East and the major literary techniques belong to the West, and the great future writers will be one who will combine the two. Do you see that happening?
I do, to definitely to quite a degree. I think that one of the perhaps one of the few things that one could say are the boons of globalization are precisely that they have this globalized world has facilitated, technology has facilitated a much more rapid exchange of ideas across cultures and across national boundaries and across class and ethnicity and even gendered boundaries, so that I think artists particularly all over the world are very drawn towards experimenting with forms that are not perhaps their own indigenous forms. And this has led on, in the level of music, theater, and certainly literature, to, I think, a hybridization of forms, techniques, and subject matter also, because a lot of artists and writers, of course, are crossing national boundaries. They're becoming citizens, like you and I, for example, of other countries very far removed from their birthlands. And so we are in many ways very fortunate. We are enriched with so many different influences on us. And so that puts us in a position where we can, in fact, as artists, as writers, as intellectuals, as activists, really draw upon this sort of rich world of experience out there. And I do think people are trying to turn. I mean, we had one of our great, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, for example. His work was it really did transcend cultural and national boundaries, became very popular in the West and remained popular in the East and his own homeland. I think a lot of younger bands that we see coming up, for example, in Pakistan, are experimenting with such techniques. We had, of course, for a while, Salman Ahmed and Junoon doing a lot of that and bringing together, rock with Sufi music, with, and all these Western techniques. I mean, in my own work, certainly because I've been exposed to both sides, I try to do that as a scholar. I try to do it as an artist, as a poet, and I feel very fortunate. On my good days, of course, on my bad days, I feel like, oh my God, I'm cut up into so many different pieces. But I think it's a wonderful thing to have access to, and I think that if we can draw on the strengths of humanity wherever it exists, that we can maybe challenge some of these rigid, narrow ideas of a sort of chauvinistic nature that this is pure and this is impure. I mean, I'd like to go beyond that.
Well, yesterday when I was last night actually, when I was trying to organize my thoughts for this discussion, I typed the word westernization, then I typed the word easternization, and the dictionary said it was not the correct word, because easternization has not been conceived as a process. So do you think while the globe is being westernized, it's also being easternized?
Oh, absolutely.
And what will be some of the manifestation that you see of that?
Well, I think just what we've talked about today, I mean, the kind of work that we're seeing, you look at so many novelists, for example, that are named and have won major Western literary prizes, happen to have been raised or come from Eastern countries. Look at the work of Arundhati Roy, for example, who is an artist but also a political activist, and her work, which is very much rooted in India, both her cultural, artistic work as well as her political work, and she actually combines them so beautifully, doesn't see a difference between those two sides of her.